Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt frontier stories about second chances, quiet love, and the people who change their lives for the ones they cherish, be sure to subscribe to USA West Stories. And while you listen, I'd love to know something. Have you ever changed a part of yourself because someone told you an uncomfortable truth? Leave a comment below. I'd genuinely love to hear your story. Levi Thorne proposed on a cool Tuesday evening, just as the last customers were leaving the bakery on Wallace Street. The lamps were beginning to glow across Virginia City. The smell of fresh bread drifted into the street, and Levi Thorne believed he already knew the answer. Most people would have. At 28 years old, he was one of the most recognizable men in town. Handsome, confident, charming, the sort of man who could walk into a crowded room and somehow leave with everyone smiling. Just an hour earlier, he had won $600 at the faro tables inside the Bale of Hay saloon. It had been one of his best nights. Luck seemed to follow him wherever he went, and standing there outside the bakery, he honestly believed luck would follow him one more time. "Josephine," he said with a grin, "will you marry me?" She looked at him quietly, long enough for the smile on his face to begin fading, long enough for him to realize she was actually considering the question. Then she said a single word: "No." Levi blinked. For a moment he thought she was teasing him. Almost everyone else did, but Josephine Caldwell rarely joked about important things. "Why?" he finally asked. She folded her arms. "Because gamblers never make good husbands." The answer hit harder than any loss he had ever taken at a card table. Not because she had rejected him, but because she sounded completely certain. There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt, no maybe, no someday, just certainty. "Ask me again when you have a real profession." Then she turned and walked back inside the bakery, leaving Levi standing alone beneath the lantern light. Now here's something I'd love your opinion on. If you had been standing there that night, would you have walked away and forgotten her, or would you have tried to prove her wrong? Because what Levi Thorne did next would consume the next 2 years of his life, and at times, it nearly broke him. Josephine Caldwell was not like most women in Virginia City. At 25 years old, she owned and operated the Mechanical Bakery, the only bakery in town, which meant she controlled something even more valuable than gold: bread. Miners could survive bad weather. They could survive failed claims. They could survive bad whiskey. But nobody wanted to survive bad bread. Every morning before sunrise, Josephine was already awake. While most of the town slept, she was lighting ovens, mixing dough, checking accounts, preparing deliveries. The bakery had belonged to her mother. When her mother passed away several years earlier, Josephine inherited everything: the ovens, the debts, the employees, the responsibilities, and perhaps most difficult of all, the constant skepticism of men who believed a woman had no business running a successful company. Yet she proved them wrong every single day. Her books were perfect, her debts were paid, her customers remained loyal, and the bakery continued growing. She wasn't lucky, she was disciplined, and that was exactly why she couldn't trust gamblers. When Josephine was 12 years old, she watched her own father gamble away nearly everything her family owned. The savings disappeared first, then the equipment, then the security her mother had spent years building. One day he left for California, chasing another promise of fortune. He never came back. For Josephine, gambling wasn't entertainment. It was abandonment. It was instability. It was broken promises. And when she looked at Levi Thorne, she didn't see the charming man everyone else admired. She saw danger wearing a handsome smile. Meanwhile, Levi Thorne was struggling to understand what had happened. For years, almost everything in his life had come easily. Not because he cheated, because he was exceptionally talented. He could read faces. He could calculate odds faster than most men could count coins. I understood patience. I understood risk. And he possessed that rare ability to remain calm while everyone around him lost control. Ironically, those qualities made him excellent at cards, but terrible at imagining a future beyond the next hand. The rejection haunted him, not for a day, not for a week, for months, and eventually he reached a conclusion that changed everything. Josephine wasn't wrong. That realization frightened him more than the rejection itself, because once he accepted she was right, he had a choice: stay exactly as he was, or become someone entirely different. What would you have chosen? Honestly, leave a comment, because most people talk about changing. Very few actually do it. The following Wednesday, Levi Thorne walked into the Bale of Hay saloon for what would be the final time. The players greeted him. The dealers smiled. Someone pulled out a chair. Levi ignored all of them. He left his latest winnings behind, turned around, and walked out. He never sat at another gambling table again. The problem was, he had absolutely no idea what came next. He had spent years mastering cards, years mastering probability, years mastering games, but none of those skills built houses. None of them repaired wagons. None of them created anything a family could rely upon. For the first time since arriving in Montana, Levi Thorne was starting over from nothing, and sometimes, starting over hurts more than failing, especially when everyone expects you to fail. Starting over turned out to be far more painful than Levi expected. The very next morning, he walked across town to the workshop of Tom Blakely. If there was one man in Virginia City whose respect could not be bought, it was Tom. The carpenter had built half the businesses on Wallace Street and repaired the other half. When Levi asked for an apprenticeship, Tom stared at him for several seconds. Then he laughed, not because the request was funny, because it seemed impossible. "You," Levi nodded. "I need a trade." Tom looked down at Levi's hands. Soft hands, clean hands, hands that had spent years holding cards instead of tools. "You'll quit by next week." Levi simply said, "Maybe, but let me try." Tom shrugged. "Be here before sunrise." Levi arrived an hour early. That first month humbled him more than any loss he had ever experienced. He couldn't drive nails straight, couldn't cut boards evenly, couldn't lift lumber all day without his shoulders feeling like they were on fire. Every evening he collapsed into bed exhausted. Every morning he woke up sore. His hands blistered. The blisters burst. New blisters formed. Then they burst too. The transformation people admire at the end of a story rarely looks admirable while it's happening. Most of the time it looks ugly, painful, embarrassing, and very lonely. Have you ever started learning something completely new as an adult? If you have, you'll understand exactly what Levi was feeling, because being a beginner can be surprisingly difficult, especially when everyone remembers who you used to be. The men in town certainly remembered. Whenever Levi walked past the saloons, old friends called out to him. Some laughed, some mocked him, some tried convincing him to come back. One even told him he was throwing away the best years of his life. For a while those words bothered him. Then something unexpected happened. The longer he worked, the less he cared what anyone thought, because for the first time in years, he was building something real. By the third month, Tom Blakely noticed the change. Levi still lacked strength, but he possessed something many experienced workers lacked: patience. The same patience that once made him dangerous at a card table now made him meticulous with wood. He measured everything twice, sometimes 3 times. Every cut mattered. Every angle mattered. Every mistake became a lesson. One afternoon, Tom held up a joint Levi had completed and showed it to the other apprentices. "This," he said, "is what attention looks like." It was the first compliment Levi had earned in months, and somehow it meant more than any gambling victory ever had. Meanwhile, life inside the bakery continued. Josephine remained busy. Customers came and went. Bread sold out daily. Bills were paid. The town kept moving forward. But occasionally, she noticed something. Every morning, a man carrying tools walked past the bakery window. Every evening, the same man returned, covered in sawdust. His clothes gradually changed. His posture changed. Even the way he walked changed. The confident gambler was disappearing. Someone else was taking his place. Josephine never mentioned it. Not to her employees, not to her friends, not even to herself. Yet she noticed. And sometimes that's where feelings quietly begin. Not with grand declarations, not with dramatic moments, but with observation, with respect, slowly replacing old assumptions. The first year passed, then the second, and by the end of those 2 years, something remarkable had happened. Levi Thorne had become one of the most respected carpenters in Madison County. People trusted his work. Families hired him. Businesses depended on him. And the strange part was, he had stopped thinking about proving anything, especially to Josephine. At first, he had changed because of what she said. Now he continued, because he genuinely loved the man he was becoming. That's an important distinction, because lasting change rarely happens for someone else. It only lasts when it eventually becomes your own choice. Then autumn arrived, and fate finally decided to interfere. The bakery oven cracked. At first, the damage looked minor, but Josephine quickly realized the truth. The crack ran deep through the firebox. Repairs wouldn't solve it. The oven needed rebuilding. Without an oven, there was no bakery. Without the bakery, there was no income. Without income, there was no future. For the first time in years, Josephine felt genuinely afraid. The town had no master mason, no specialist capable of rebuilding the structure quickly. Then someone suggested a name: Levi Thorne. Josephine sat quietly after hearing it. For a long moment, she simply stared at the damaged bricks. Because hiring Levi meant something more than hiring a carpenter. It meant seeing the result of the choice he had made 2 years earlier. Finally, she took out a sheet of paper and wrote a short note. Mr. Thorne, my oven requires rebuilding. Then you do the work. When Levi received the message, he read it 3 times, not because the words were complicated, because he never expected to receive them. After 2 years of silence, Josephine Caldwell was standing at the edge of his life once again, and this time, everything depended on what happened next. What do you think Josephine was really feeling when she wrote that note? Was it simply business, or had she been quietly watching him all along? Leave your answer in the comments, because the next chapter changes everything. Levi arrived at the bakery on Tuesday morning just after sunrise. For the first time in 2 years, he stood only a few feet away from Josephine Caldwell. Neither of them spoke immediately. Neither seemed quite sure where to begin. Time had changed them both. Josephine looked older, not older in appearance, older in experience. The responsibility of running a business had settled into her posture. There was confidence in her now that hadn't existed when Levi first proposed. Levi had changed even more. The transformation was impossible to miss. The expensive coats were gone. The polished boots were gone. The smooth hands were gone. In their place stood a man with scarred fingers, weathered skin, and shoulders shaped by years of labor. Josephine noticed all of it. She tried not to, but she did. Levi examined the damaged oven carefully. He checked every crack, measured every angle, studied every weakened section. When he finally stood up, his expression was serious. It has to be rebuilt. Josephine nodded. She already knew. How long? 6 days. Can it be done? Levi looked directly at her. Yes, it was such a simple answer. Yet somehow it brought her more comfort than she expected. Because Levi no longer sounded like a man relying on luck. He sounded like a man relying on skill. And there is a difference. A very important difference. The next 6 days became something neither of them would ever forget. Levi worked from dawn until late evening, brick by brick, layer by layer, every movement deliberate, every measurement exact, every decision careful. Virginia City watched. People slowed their horses as they passed. Customers lingered outside longer than necessary. Even the miners noticed, because everyone knew the history between Levi Thorne and Josephine Caldwell, and everyone understood what this project really represented. The oven wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. Something else was being rebuilt too. Trust. Every morning, Josephine brought him coffee. Every afternoon, she brought bread. At first, they exchanged only a few words. Questions about measurements, questions about materials, questions about construction. Nothing personal, nothing emotional, but little by little, the silence that had existed between them for 2 years began to disappear. One afternoon, Josephine found him studying blueprints beside the unfinished oven. You taught yourself masonry too, Levi smiled. Tom said a carpenter should understand every part of a building. Josephine nodded. Then she surprised herself by smiling. A small smile, but the first one she had given him in years. Levi thought about that smile for the rest of the day. And maybe some of you understand exactly why. Because sometimes, one genuine smile from the right person means more than 100 compliments from everyone else. On the 6th day, the oven was finished. It stood stronger than the one it replaced, more efficient, more durable, better designed, a reflection of the man who built it. The entire bakery gathered around as Josephine prepared the first fire. Everyone waited. The room filled with warmth. The bricks settled perfectly. No cracks, no problems, no smoke escaping where it shouldn't. Then came the real test. The first loaf. Josephine mixed the dough herself, placed it inside, and waited. When the bread finally emerged, the bakery fell silent. She broke it open. Steam rose into the air. The texture was perfect. The crust was perfect. Everything was perfect. For several moments, she simply stared at it. Then she looked at Levi. This is a good oven. Levi smiled softly. Thank you. The words were simple, yet both of them knew they were talking about more than bricks, more than bread, more than construction. Josephine walked closer, close enough to see every scar on his hands, close enough to see the man he had become. Not the gambler she once rejected. The man who stood before her now had built something, created something, earned something. Most importantly, he had changed without asking for applause, without demanding recognition, without expecting a reward. And suddenly, Josephine understood something she hadn't fully realized before. For 2 years, she had been watching. Every morning through the bakery window, every afternoon as he crossed town carrying tools, every season as he continued moving forward. She had noticed everything. Perhaps not intentionally, but she had noticed. And somewhere along the way, admiration had quietly replaced doubt. Finally, she asked the question she had been holding for days. How much do I owe you? Levi looked at her, then shook his head. Nothing. Josephine frowned. Nothing. Levi smiled. I don't charge for work. I did for personal reasons. For a second, neither moved, neither spoke. The entire bakery suddenly felt very quiet. Then Josephine glanced down at his hands, the hands that had once held cards, the hands that now built ovens, built homes, built futures. She looked back up and asked softly, "Are you going to ask again?" Levi's heart nearly stopped. For 2 years he had imagined that moment, hundreds of times. Yet now that it was finally happening, he found himself speechless. "I was waiting for permission." Josephine laughed quietly. The sound surprised both of them. Then she shook her head. "You don't need permission anymore." Levi took a slow breath, and for the second time in his life, he asked Josephine Caldwell to marry him. This time there was no hesitation, no long pause, no uncertainty. She smiled and said yes. The wedding took place that December inside the bakery itself. The new oven stood behind them, warm and glowing, almost like a witness. Tom Blakely attended. The apprentices attended. The customers attended. Half of Virginia City seemed determined to attend. People later joked that it was the only wedding in town where everyone left smelling like fresh bread. But those who were there never forgot it, because they had witnessed something rare. Not just a marriage, a transformation. The years that followed were good years, not perfect. No life ever is. There were difficult winters, slow business seasons, unexpected expenses, moments of worry, moments of loss. But there was also laughter, partnership, family, love. The kind of love that grows stronger because it was earned. Levi never gambled again. Not once. Not during hard times. Not during easy times. Not even when old friends invited him back. That chapter of his life remained closed forever. Instead, he built houses, built furniture, built businesses, built a reputation that lasted decades. Josephine continued running the bakery, and eventually Levi learned to bake as well. At first, he was terrible, absolutely terrible, which, according to Josephine, was only fair considering how terrible she was with a hammer. But eventually, they became a team. Each morning before sunrise, they worked side by side, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through Virginia City became a reminder that some of the strongest relationships are built slowly, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of commitment at a time. Years later, when their daughters asked about the story of the first proposal, Josephine always gave the same answer. "Your father was the only man I ever met who treated rejection like instructions." Then she would smile and add one more thing. "I told him gamblers make bad husbands. He heard me say, become a better man." And perhaps that's why people still remember their story, because it isn't really about gambling, or baking, or carpentry. It's about listening. It's about growth. It's about becoming the person you are capable of being. Not because someone demands it, but because you finally decide to become that person yourself. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Josephine was watching Levi during those 2 years? Or do you believe she only noticed him after the bakery oven broke? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if stories like this remind you that character matters more than charm, and commitment matters more than promises, be sure to subscribe to USA West Stories. Here, we tell stories about second chances, quiet courage, enduring love, and the people who become better than they once were. Until next time, thank you for spending part of your day with USA West Stories.